So we were almost at the end of the book of Numbers, and our people, we are still in the wilderness. And if you've forgotten why we're still wandering, it's because of the sin of the 12 spies, which is a story that was told 5 parshiot back, but it's recalled again this week in the Torah portion, Matot. At the end of this portion, 2 of Jacob's grandsons ask Moses if they can stay put in Yazer where they are instead of entering into the promised land, because Yazer is better suited for grazing their cattle herds. Moses, seeing this as a lack of loyalty, is incensed. He calls back to the sin of their fathers, Reuben and Gad, who were among the 10 spies who scouted out the promised land, declared it the land of milk and honey, but then urged everyone not to go because of the highly fortified cities and the people who looked like giants. Only 2 spies had the faith that they could make it in this land, but their view was overwhelmed by all the frightened masses. And it is because of this sin that God pronounced that the entire generation would wander the desert until they died out, and then a new one could enter the promised land. 5 weeks ago, just as we were reading the original story of the 12 spies in Shlach Lecha, I was invited with 12 other Jewish leaders to scout out the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I admit, I was wary. Saudi Arabia was one of only 2 countries in the world that did not allow tourist visas, the other being North Korea, until 2019. Saudi Arabia was the only country in the world where women could be jailed for driving and needed permission from a male guardian to travel, laws that only changed in the last several years. And of course, there was the widely publicized assassination in 2018 of American journalist Jamal Khashoggi, a plot which American intelligence had tied to the Crown Prince. But my invitation did not come from the government, but from Sheikh Dr. Mohammed Al-Issa, who is the Secretary General of the Muslim World League, an NGO committed to creating dialogue between cultures, fighting religious extremism, and providing humanitarian aid throughout the world. They expressly stated that this trip was not about politics, but interfaith dialogue and building relationships. Our president, Dr. Shani Silverberg, who knew of Dr. Al-Issa's leadership, urged me to go. In 2020, Dr. Al-Issa led a senior delegation of 63 Muslim religious leaders from 23 countries to visit Auschwitz. For his leadership of that trip, as well as his outspoken censure of Wahhabist Islamic extremism, Dr. Al-Issa has gotten harsh critique from other Muslims, even death threats. I thought that if Dr. Al-Issa was willing to take these courageous actions to build interfaith understanding and relationships, that I could not reject this invitation. As it won't surprise you to hear, when I saw Saudi Arabia from the ground, I saw a glimpse of modernization at a dizzying speed. Over 70% of the current population is under the age of 30. And the government pays for hundreds of thousands of young Saudis to study abroad, and they come back, and they contribute to a national brain trust with increasingly liberal democratic ideals and strong skills. The Crown Prince's stated 2030 vision includes building ambitious carbon-neutral development projects all over the country, planting hundreds of millions of trees. He even founded an intellectual warfare center, which is fighting Islamic extremism online and through the educational system. Gone are the stick-wielding Wahhabist morality police who were tasked with enforcing dress codes and extreme interpretations of Islamic law. I myself did not have to wear skirts, and I was told I did not have to cover my hair, and I was surprised to see that Saudi women were also beginning to do the same. A memorable moment during our visit was a lunch with Dr. Al-Issa and a dozen of his highest ministers at the Muslim World League headquarters in Riyadh. They had ensured there would be kosher food for us the entire time we were there, which required flying in kosher meat from the UAE and flying in a kosher supervisor from South Africa. Dr. Al-Issa spoke through a translator about the mission of the Muslim World League to spread Islam's true message of peace, to build bridges with others of good faith. He shared with us how emotional he felt when he visited Auschwitz, to witness the gas chambers with his own eyes, when he saw the piles of shoes left over from all the victims. He instructed his entire group to lay down their mats, and they knelt and prayed. When one of our group, whose parents were Holocaust survivors, thanked Dr. Al-Issa for going, he gently demurred, "Please do not thank me. It was my obligation to witness." You might think of these actions of visiting Auschwitz, or inviting a group of Jewish leaders to Saudi Arabia, or even going to visit Yeshiva University and teaching, that these are all symbolic gestures. But in every faith tradition, symbols matter, and they have power. The fact that Dr. Al-Issa, who is known in his country as a Zionist imam, was given the honor of delivering the main sermon for the Hajj festival in Mecca this year is a significant signal that Saudi Arabia wants to normalize relations with Israel. These are hopeful signs of what may come. Now, I was given the honor of presenting Dr. Al-Issa with our gift, a shofar, which was adorned in silver. And I spoke of how the shofar serves as a symbol of our common patriarch, Abraham, or Ibrahim, and how the ram that stopped the sacrifice of his son was a symbol of God's promise that was from our shared ancient history together. I ended with singing the words of the psalmist, Olam chesed yibaneh, the world is built on kindness. And I taught the room to sing the refrain. I was reminded that music is the one language that never requires translation. And I could feel the melody softening all the boundaries between us. Breaking bread, sharing stories, singing together. I am not naive enough to think that these alone will bring about world peace. But I also don't think that we can get there without it. In fact, I was reminded of how much politics are personal. I had the privilege of traveling on this trip with Jason Greenblatt, who is President Trump's Middle East envoy, who helped negotiate the Abraham Accords and was greeted there like an old friend. And Eli Epstein, who is an Orthodox Jewish businessman, who is quietly spoken of as the true father of the Abraham Accords. When Eli first traveled to the Gulf states over 36 years ago, he had to secure a second passport that didn't have any Israeli stamps in them because it was too risky to travel there openly as a Jewish Zionist. Over the years, Eli's deep relationships and friendships with businessmen and leaders in the Gulf states have been a foundation for significant change in that whole region. Relationships matter and are powerful. It was not lost on me that all 12 of our biblical scouts who were set out to assess the Promised Land, they all saw the same things, some of the real dangers, as well as the tremendous potential of the land. So what was the difference between the 10 and the 2? Well, the vast majority of the reconnaissance team, they allowed fear to rule them. They could not countenance anyone going back there because they were too afraid. But God rewarded and praised the 2 outliers who saw the same dangers but were willing to take a risk in order to realize the potential and promise that they saw. This week, President Joe Biden went to Saudi Arabia on the invitation of the kingdom's leadership. there has been a great deal of criticism for his even going, concern that his mere presence could be a sanction for bad behavior. But if we are to ever hope that America might wield its influence to bring about greater freedoms and more peaceful ties in the region, we need to start out by scouting the land, not to ignore the very real threats to democracy or the dangers of unchecked power, but to understand it all with our own very open eyes, and then to report back.